and welcome to episode 8 of Podcasts of the Rings. And here's hoping I'm in a better mood than I was last week. But only time will tell. I'll say that the Sauron bug bit me last week. I was just a little moody. I thought it made for interesting radio or podcasting. It might not have, though.
Just like Sauron cast the shadow of evil over the Númenóreans, so too was the shadow of evil cast over your heart last week.
Whoa. I was expecting you to go, oh, Jessica, it wasn't that bad. But okay. The shadow of evil, I guess, was how my mood chalked up last week. Anyway, we talked about Sauron last week on this podcast, where we go through the minutia of Lord of the Rings Middle-earth lore as written by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. And I, a relative noob, is being educated by Judgy McJudgePants over here, Alexander Mitchell. Hello, Alex.
I guess I'll take that title, Judgy McJudgePants.
Gandalf the Grey over here always knows what's good and who's got the shadow being cast and what.
I arrive precisely when I mean to.
Okay. Well, again, I don't think people need to know about our personal life,
okay.
But Alex, welcome to episode 8, the last episode of the official podcast of the Rings before God. Rings of the Pod. Rings of Power.
Yes, Rings of the Pod.
Rings of the Pod.
Yeah.
People.
I'm so excited. We only have
actually?
Yeah, we only have a week until the premiere. It's so exciting.
Why are you so excited?
Because I just want to see what they do with these stories. We've spent all these past weeks talking about the possibilities, the histories of these characters, and Amazon. Now we get to see what they've decided to do with them, and that's exciting to me.
Let me ask you, because I know we know you like this. We know you love it. We know that it's your favorite thing on the planet. Thus, you're able to speak so expertly on so many things. And you're so good, too, when you're like, oh, I don't know if I know this. That's true of anyone that's an expert. You don't know everything. You know a lot of things. Why does Lord of the Rings and this lore speak to you so much? And why has it always spoken to you this much?
I think it's unique among fantasy stories in that, excuse me, I'm getting choked up just thinking about it.
Clearly.
The richness and depth of the world that Tolkien created is just fascinating. The characters are interesting, and the connections. I mean, when I first read, and I think when many people first read Lord of the Rings, you get all of these just peeks behind the curtain of the backstory to this entire world. And it's sort of unique in that, and so many authors and storytellers since Tolkien have taken inspiration from that in how to make these amazingly crafted and detailed worlds. And I think the themes present within the stories just are universal. It speaks to this idea of hope and perseverance and good triumphing over evil. And I think that's, it's hopeful. It's a good sort of message. And the other thing that I think is so fascinating, and we'll talk about a little bit of it today in this episode, is not only just the stories that Tolkien created, but the story of the creation of the stories and his process for how he created this massive mythology and where it started. And he was continually tweaking and adjusting things and adding and changing things over time. And I think that's really cool. It's not something that just came fully formed out of his mind and he put it on the page. He was constantly working on this his entire life, and it was never finished. We have, the product of his work up until his death, and we can see where there were still things that were a work in progress, which I find fascinating.
This is a very eloquent answer that you just gave us, and it's lovely. What did this mean to young Alex?
I think
what ensnared you early on?
Just the imagery. I remember reading the Silmarillion and the descriptions of the battles against the forces of evil in Morgoth, and the Balrogs fighting against the Noldor, and it just, as a kid, I loved fantasy before Tolkien. Just the idea of elves and magic, and it was not until a little bit later, but playing D&D definitely, I think, coincided with my love of Tolkien and being able to make stories and characters that were inspired by Lord of the Rings. So I just, for whatever reason, I always loved that genre, and Tolkien is the epitome of that genre for me. So I think just the adventure and the excitement and the action were what hooked me. And then as I grew to learn more and read more about it as I grew older, I could appreciate other elements of it than just the sort of, sword wielding and magic using that I still love. But
it's the story that grows with you.
Yes, and there's always more to learn and get deeper insights from as you grow older. I will be loving and reading Tolkien for my entire life. I think I will never grow tired of it. There will always be new things to discover because it's so vast. And hopefully we'll continue to get more adaptations of it as time goes on as well, and we can see other people's interpretations and takes on Tolkien's world and characters. And I think that's a cool thing.
I love that. So let's grow together in this world of lore. Yes. And learn the last leg of what we want to know before we get into the Rings of Power.
We are talking today about the elf responsible for the namesake of the show that we're going to be watching next week, Celebrimbor, the crafter of the Rings of Power himself, a very interesting character. If I will up top, because I am a fan of these. If you've played the Shadows of Mordor or Shadow of Mordor video games, Celebrimbor is featured heavily. They take many liberties with his story there, and we won't be talking about them. But I know that this is I think a fan favorite character if you've played those games because of his portrayal in them. But spoilers. They diverge heavily from what we know about him based on Tolkien's writings in those games. Many liberties are taken, but still a very cool character. So to start off with, kind of getting an idea of where Celebrimbor fits in with the bigger picture and things we've talked about before. He is the son of Curufin. Kuru. Yeah, Curufin, who I believe is...
Curulfin?
Curulfin?
I don't know. Spell it?
Curufin.
Curufin.
Yeah, there you go. You
got it. Okay. Curufin?
Kuru?
Kuru?
Uwu?
Uwu? Curufin?
Oh no, I hate it.
I love it.
Curufin is one of the sons of Feanor. I believe he's his fifth son. I'm not sure. One of the sons of Feanor. And Celebrimbor was born in Aman, in Valinor, during the Years of the Trees. So we talked about the difference between like the elves who saw the light and didn't. He is of the light. He was born during the time of the trees.
Laurelin and Elendil?
Telperion.
Yeah.
Laurelin, Telperion are the two trees.
Who's Elendil?
Elendil is Amandil's son, father of Isildur and Anarion.
There you go. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's so hard with all these names. It's really not, but Telperion?
Telperion.
Yes. Okay.
No, there's a lot of names. So his name means Fist of Silver, speaking to his talent at the forge, at the anvil. He was a very, very, very talented craftsman, which he kind of inherited from his grandfather. Feanor, our favorite creepy uncle, was the greatest craftsman among the elves ever to live. Created the Silmarils and the Palantiri and many other works. So
they're kind of like the Norse mythology homies that made Mjolnir and stuff like that.
Yeah, similar.
Similar, different, but
yeah, Tolkien, I mean, drew from so many different kinds of mythology, so I'm sure he had Norse mythology in mind with some of these things.
Sure.
So Celebrimbor kind of carries on that legacy of Fëanor, but his demeanor is not the same. He's not as fiery and aggressive and confrontational as Fëanor, which we'll come to see. So he was present during the exile of the Noldor and went over with his kin and his father into Middle-earth. And he stayed with his father, Curufin, and his uncle, Celegorm. Curufin and Celegorm, two sons of Fëanor, they pretty much were tight. They did a lot of stuff together. And they eventually settled down in Himlod in Beleriand and sort of guarded one of the passes into Beleriand against the forces of Morgoth. During the siege of Angband, they were successful in this, but eventually they fail in their mission during the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, and they are forced to flee. So Curufin, Celegorm, and Celebrimbor, they all go to the elven stronghold of Nargothrond. Now, this is a place built into the caves of one of the mountain ranges in Beleriand by Finrod Felagund, and that's how he got his name Felagund from the dwarves, which means like hewer of mines or hewer of caves or something like that. Oh. So after he built Nargothrond, they gave him that title. If you'll remember from last week, Finrod featured heavily in the story of Beren and Luthien, and we come back to that now as kind of backstory to Celebrimbor. So Beren comes to Finrod seeking help in his quest for the Silmaril, right? And Finrod he's not able to leave with a whole army from Nargothrond, but he leaves with himself, and then I believe 10 companions. So he leaves Orodreth, his kin, in command of Nargothrond. But Curufin and Celegorm are there. And now they come from separate families. Finrod descendant from Finarfin, I believe. And the sons of Fëanor, obviously descendant from Fëanor. So there's political tension there. And the sons of Fëanor, remember, they swore this, along with Fëanor, they swore this oath to...
Silmarils.
Yes. Let no one else have the Silmarils, get them back. That's what they are here to do.
And remind us, just briefly, the creepy uncle made the Silmarils because he couldn't get creepy niece's hair from Galadriel, and instead made the Silmarils in the honor of her hair and Talparian and Larlin.
Yes, it's sort of...
and what did the Silmarils do?
They're just these...
beautiful
gems that contain within them the light of the two trees.
Got it.
So after the destruction of the trees, they're the only things left that carry on that light,
right,
within them. And it's kind of implied that he was inspired by Galadriel's hair, right?
Because she wouldn't give him a strand of the hair.
Exactly. So
because he's weird.
He's a little weird.
So it's a weird thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and that they swore this oath now to get them back at all
weird
costs. Yeah.
Okay.
So that Curufin and Celegorm, that's on their minds. That's what they want to do. And they're in Nargothrond, and Finrod has just left. So they make political moves, and they get the support of the people of Nargothrond. And they want to just amass power because their goal is to march on Morgoth and take back these Silmarils. So they're trying to get as much support behind them as they can. Now, Beren and Finrod go. Remember, they fight against Sauron and they're captured. And Luthien hears about this. She, senses it, and then her and Melian together figure out, oh, Finrod and Beren are captured. So she goes and in her travels encounters Celegorm and Curufin. They're out hunting with Huan, the Hound. Now, Huan was Celegorm's hound, I believe. Yes.
To begin with?
Correct. He was given it by Orome and took him with him to Middle-earth when the Noldor were exiled. So Huan happens upon Luthien. They talk with Luthien, and she tells them about what her mission is. Oh, Finrod's been captured, and Beren is with him, and I'm going to save them. And they go, this is a good opportunity, because we kind of want Finrod out of the picture so we can get more power for ourselves. Luthien's after one of the Silmarils, too. She's trying to help Beren. We can't have that. The Silmarils are for our taking. And we especially don't want them in the hand of Thingol if Beren succeeds.
Why did Beren want the Silmaril? Did you say that?
He wanted Luthien's hand in marriage, and her father, Elu Thingol, sent him on a quest to get a Silmaril from Morgoth. Basically,
like Jason and the Fleece, or
yes,
kind of thing.
Basically thinking, oh, I'm sending him to his death. There's
right.
I
think we did talk about that before, but episodes ago.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a while. Okay.
So they see this as an opportunity to just kind of like, well, if we stop Luthien from helping them and rescuing them, Finrod will be out of the picture, and it's going to be way easier for us to A, have more power in Nargothrond, and B, have one less person after the Silmarils. Also, Celegorm kind of talk about more creepy stuff, although they're not as related. Becomes enamored with Luthien and her beauty. And they go, okay, we're going to capture Luthien, bring her back to Nargothrond, and force a marriage between Celegorm and Luthien so that they can have an alliance with her father in Doriath, Thingol. And the idea being, well, if we have an alliance with him, we can combine our powers and we can take the Silmarils back. So that's their plan. They capture Luthien, bring her back to Nargothrond. Jeez. This act of treachery.
But why didn't she just flick her cloak?
Because they feigned, we'll bring you back and we'll help you. And then when she got there, they took her cloak from her and imprisoned her. So she trusted them. So, and that was a mistake. But Huan takes pity on Luthien. He's smart. He's intelligent. He's not just a dog. And so one of the 3 times he's able to speak, he uses to tell her how to escape and helps her escape. And then they go and free and rescue Finrod and Beren. And we know that story from last week. After Luthien is successful in taking back Tol Sirion from Sauron, a bunch of prisoners that were there, elven prisoners, return to Nargothrond. Some of them were from Nargothrond. So they return, and they come back with this tale of how they were freed by Luthien. And that Luthien was taken prisoner, and the treachery of Curufin and Celegorm is revealed, and the people turn from them. Orodreth maintains gets control back politically, and he banishes Curufin and Celegorm, casts them out of Nargothrond. And as they leave, they once again encounter Beren and Luthien on the borders of Doriath and attack them because they're pissed. Wow. Their plan has been foiled, and they wrestle for a little while, and then as they're fleeing, I can't remember, I think it's Celegorm takes a shot at Luthien, and Beren gets in the way and takes it, and then she heals him and stuff. But so they don't kill him. But this is important because Celebrimbor is in Nargothrond at this time. He's Curufin's son, and he learns of this treachery of his father, and he decides not to go with him in his exile. He stays in Nargothrond. And so this is a big character moment for Celebrimbor because, remember, he's of Feanorian descent. He's his grandson. And so he kind of has a choice in this moment. Do I go with my father and uncle and continue in their mission in this oath they've sworn? Because he is not bound by the oath. It was just the sons of Feanor. So he's technically not bound by the oath. So in this moment, he chooses, I'm not going to follow them down this path that clearly is leading to evil deeds because of this oath they've sworn. And instead decides to stay by himself in Nargothrond. And so he's choosing a better path than the Sons of Feanor. So this is a big deal for him. So he stays in Nargothrond. He stays there until it's sacked. It's attacked by a dragon and destroyed in one of the many battles of Beleriand. And after its destruction, he makes his way eventually to Eregion in Middle-earth. And this is where we get into some conflicting, potentially, accounts of the history of this character. But I will sort of tell you and our listeners what is said in Unfinished Tales. There's a lot on Celebrimbor and Unfinished Tales in the chapter on Galadriel and Celeborn because their histories are connected. So, according to Unfinished Tales, Celebrimbor, before the destruction of Beleriand and before he goes to Middle-earth in Eregion, he goes to Gondolin, the hidden city, and works there under King Turgon for a time. And it is in the hidden city of Gondolin that he creates what is called the Elisar, the Elf Stone. And this is a green gem, which maybe had some like magical healing powers. And eventually this gem is, when Gondolin falls, it's rescued by Idril, who is the mother of Earendil, the mariner. And it's taken by Earendil, the wife of Earendil. It's taken by Earendil into the west when he goes to besiege the Valar for aid in the fight against Morgoth. And that's where it remains. After the destruction of Beleriand, Celebrimbor goes and settles in Eregion. And there are conflicting accounts. Most accounts say that Celebrimbor was the lord and ruler of Eregion. But then there are a few accounts that say that it's Galadriel and Celeborn who rule over Eregion. And this is, I talked about the story of Tolkien creating this story, right? Celebrimbor existed in the Silmarillion story and the original mythology for the world before Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings. And during the writing of Lord of the Rings, he comes up with these characters of Galadriel and Celeborn, right? I think I mentioned in a previous episode where when the Fellowship gets there, he goes, when they get to Lorien, I guess this place was ruled by an elven queen? Okay, who is this elven queen? Yeah. And so Tolkien was in the process of sort of retconning, if you will, Galadriel into the history that he had already written. Because she didn't exist in it. She only existed in the Lord of the Rings story. But he knew, well, if this, he was discovering, as he would have liked to kind of think of it, he was discovering who she was as he was writing and thinking these stories. And eventually that led him to go, oh, she has a much bigger part in this story. And so I think some of these writings that we see where he says that she's the ruler, this is him figuring out exactly how she fits into the events of the First and Second Age. So which one's canon? I guess both, right? We don't have a definitive answer, but either you can go with the, Galadriel and Celeborn founded it, or Celebrimbor did. But he is in Eregion with Galadriel and Celeborn either way. And while they're there in Eregion, again in Unfinished Tales, there's a conversation between Celebrimbor and Galadriel where she talks about how she's sad at the desolation she is seeing in Middle Earth, and she longs for Valinor and Aman in her home. And this is where we get another insight into Celebrimbor's character, where he says, well, I love you. So we get this bit where Celebrimbor is in love with Galadriel, even though she's married to Celeborn.
Oh, I'm sorry. What? Is this the first time I'm actually paying attention? I didn't know that.
We got a love triangle, and now Jess is invested.
But I didn't know. You never hinted at this even before.
No, because I was waiting till the Celebrimbor episode.
You would have had me sooner.
Well, now I got you. It'll be interesting if we see. I mean, we haven't seen anything on Celeborn in the trailers, and there have been some very funny memes I've seen of
because he's a cuck
of Celeborn. Yeah, he kind of is. But I've seen some very funny Celeborn memes, especially after we see Hallbrand and Galadriel interacting, and there's some chemistry there. So Celebrimbor, though, is in love with Galadriel, and so he says, I want to make something for you to remind you of home. So he makes a second Elfstone, a second Elisar, excuse me. And there, again, I'll mention it for completion. In Unfinished Tales, there's another smith. I can't remember his name.
Smithy. Alan Smithy.
Alan Smithy. I don't remember what he's called. He's only referenced in one document that actually this is the guy who made the original Elfstone, but I think Tolkien was in the process of just saying, no, it was actually Celebrimbor, like figuring out this story. So that character probably eventually would have been kind of done away with. But just for completion, there are conflicting sources on who made the first Elfstone. And then there's also a story that the second Elisar actually wasn't just one made by Celebrimbor to give to Galadriel, but it was the original Elisar brought back from Valinor by Gandalf and then given to Galadriel. So that's another story of the origin of the Elisar. So you can either go with Celebrimbor made it out of love for Galadriel, or
I like that one.
I like that one better too. I agree. Because it's like, oh, the second one, oh no, it's actually the first one, and just Gandalf brought it back. Like, I think it makes more. It's a cooler character moment for Celebrimbor and Galadriel to have it be that origin of Celebrimbor making it for her. So this second Elfstone, this second Elisar, is given to Galadriel by Celebrimbor, and it's passed down to Galadriel's daughter, Celebrian, and then down to Celebrian's daughter, Arwen. Arwen Evenstar.
Wait. I know it's not the necklace, but is it the necklace?
Yes, because that's an invention by Peter Jackson. The Evenstar necklace doesn't exist in the text. And that's...
But is it that, though?
I think it's meant to replace that, because in the films, Arwen gives it to Aragorn. And in the books, what happens is the Elisar, this Elfstone, is given to Aragorn during the giving of the gifts as the Fellowship leaves Lothlorien. And it's it's this sort of symbolic thing of, Arwen had probably left it in the keeping of Galadriel when she was in Lothlorien to give to Aragorn. And then it's kind of this almost a preemptive wedding gift.
Right.
Because Galadriel is her grandmother. And so it's this thing from the family of like, all right, we know that if you're successful, you're going to marry Arwen, so this is a sign of our respect for that. And then he wears it. He wears the Elisar.
So then it's got to be that.
It's kind of that.
In theory. It's not, though, as the movie would have you think, her giving up her immortalhood.
Not
it's just
at
like,
all.
hey, here's a gift.
That's a filmic device to represent that element of the story that I think otherwise is kind of hard to demonstrate on film.
Right.
Which I think works for the movie, but yeah, it
does work. Yeah. And now you have a piece of, you have basically an action figure. You can sell little girls.
Exactly. Yeah. There's so many people with the Evenstar necklace.
When I saw one for the first time, like at a convention, I was like, oh, I want one. And I came up, I was like, Oh, they're so big. It was like gaudy. I couldn't want it less. It's too big. I want a little one where it doesn't even look like it.
Well, you can get an Elisar then, because that's just one. It's just a green gem, probably way smaller. Yeah.
You know what? I do want that because my birthstone is emerald.
Oh, yeah. There you go. That's a dual purpose.
It's a dual.
And what's your favorite bird?
The mourning dove.
Okay. It's an eagle wings on the little.
Eagles I do like.
Okay, well there you go. Yeah, because it's set within.
That was my school mascot.
There you go. Triple purpose. It's
So
set
many
within a little
purposes
thing that has eagle wings on it. In silver.
Is it?
So
Is it? Okay, cool.
So this name of the Elfstone, the Elisar, is the name that Aragorn takes when he's king. During his coronation, King Elisar. So this was kind of, I think it was like a prophecy, like you'll be called Elisar, and this is what. So anyway, that's the connection from Celebrimbor to all the way down to Aragorn. All right, this brings us to
your mom.
Okay. All right. The Second Age. So that happens during the Second Age. And what also happens is we have Celebrimbor leading the Gwaith y Myrdain, which is a guild of elven craftspeople in Eregion. And this is where we get back to the varying accounts of leadership. Whoever was the original leader of Eregion, if you believe it's Celebrimbor, he's just the leader the whole time. If you believe it's Galadriel and Celeborn, after the coming of Anatar, which we'll talk about really soon, he eventually Anatar persuades the Gwaith y Myrdain to seize power in Eregion, and they do. And that's the reason Galadriel leaves to go to Lothlorien. So eventually, by that time, Celebrimbor is in power, whichever account you believe. And because he is the head of this, or because he is of Feanorian descent, he's the best craftsman ever. He's the head of this guild. And soon he befriends the dwarves nearby to the east in Khazad-dûm, the people of Durin. And he becomes particularly close with a dwarf called Narvi, and together they craft the Doors of Durin, which is the sort of west entrance to Moria. Yes, Melon. Speak friend and enter. So that's how those doors are made. Narvi, very minor character, pretty much the only time he's referenced. So, but they work together with the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. And then in 1200 of the Second Age, we get Anatar coming into Eregion, and Celebrimbor, even though he's, kind of denounced the oath that his father is following, or was following, because at this point the Silmarils, are gone. There's still that Feanorian sort of desire for excellence and pride and power in him. So he takes up Anatar on his offer of sharing knowledge. And, I think there's an element of Celebrimbor kind of like trying to see the good in people as well. That's what I like to imagine. And being like, well, why shouldn't we trust this Anatar guy? Why would he be trying to pull one over on us? Even though Galadriel at this point doesn't trust him at all. And obviously gil-galad and Elrond don't, because they don't let him into Lindon. So, but even though Galadriel doesn't trust him, they still welcome him in, and he teaches Celebrimbor and his guild how to make these magic rings. And under his instruction, they start to make lesser rings, which are kind of Gandalf mentions them in the Fellowship of the Ring. They're not like the rings of power, right? The 7, the 9, and the 3. They're kind of, they got like some minor abilities, and they just give them out like candy to kids, I guess. I don't know. We don't really know a lot about the lesser rings.
Which is why initially Gandalf was not alarmed by Bilbo's acquisition of the ring.
Yeah, because he knew that these lesser rings existed, and so he thought, well, there's magic rings, but this is probably just, one of the ones that Celebrimbor made as a training project.
Right.
They're referred to as essays in the craft, right? So these things that you do as just honing your skills. So a lot of these lesser rings are made, and we don't really know where they end up. But then in 1500 of the Second Age, the greater rings are made, the 16 rings of power. These being the 9, the 7, and the 3. The 3 elven rings are only made after Annatar leaves. They are not at all touched by Sauron, by Annatar. Celebrimbor makes them by himself. He's so good.
Why?
I think it's, again, that Feanorian pride. I think it's, you know what? I'm so good, I don't need Annatar's help to make these rings. I can do it all by myself. Because Sauron was like overseeing and helping in the crafting of these rings of power. And I also think there is a certain, going along with that kind of pride, like elvish pride of like, well, these are for the elves. They're going to be made by an elf. They're not going to be touched by this other person.
So he was commissioned to make the rings by Sauron to begin with.
He wasn't commissioned.
Well, he said, Sauron says, I want you to make these rings.
Sauron...
Well, because that's what I'm saying. Why did he make them then?
Sauron came as... His pitch was, I'm an emissary of the Valar, and I am going to teach you something that will give you the ability to make things that will help make Middle-earth better. They will help make it more like your homeland that you miss in Aman. That's why, Celebrimbor made the Elisar for Galadriel, right?
Right.
So they're trying to make Middle-earth more like home and better. And so that's his pitch. So he's not commissioning them, he's not ordering them, but he's saying, look, I'm here to freely share knowledge, and we can, benefit from this together. That's
where does Sauron go? Why is Sauron not there while he's making these rings?
Because he goes to leave to make the one.
I see.
Because he makes...
Celebrimbor does not know that.
No. Yeah, he leaves because he's like, all right, they're making the rings, great. Awesome, this will be great. So he leaves to go make the one ring. But then Celebrimbor's like, I'm going to make these 3 elven rings. So he does, but because he's using the same, magics that were taught to him by Sauron, they're still subject to the one when the one is made. So Sauron goes and makes the one, puts it on, and the elves immediately sense him, and they go, oh, take the rings off. So let's talk a little bit about the elven rings. We have 3 of them. We have Narya, which is the ring of fire. We have Nenya, which is the ring of adamant. Or
Nenya business.
The ring of adamant or the ring of water. And then we have Vilya, which is the ring of air. Then we have, we'll just talk about the other ones. We have the 7 dwarf rings, and the powers of the dwarf rings as they were, we'll talk about the powers of the elf rings. They were used to preserve things, hide things, mostly. So that all the elf rings had that power. So that's why, for instance, when Galadriel has her ring, she is able to make Lothlorien this magical place, and why she can sort of protect it from the enemy, because she can hide it, right, and hide herself.
Yet it still is connected to the one ring.
Yes.
So Sauron would know that it's there.
No, because he doesn't have the one ring at that time.
I see. Got it. Yeah.
So their fate is tied to the one, but it's who, if Sauron did have the one ring, first of all, everybody would be screwed. Second of all, then he would be able to just know what the other rings are doing.
Got it.
So, yeah, since at that time,
so that's the hitch.
Yeah, exactly, and that becomes a thing with the elf rings, and why Galadriel is kind of sad when she's tested in the Fellowship of the Ring, because she realizes, like, well, either we're all going to die because Sauron's going to win, or we're going to win, but the one ring is destroyed, meaning my ring has no power.
I didn't realize it did that to the other rings.
Yeah, so when, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but because we're on the subject, when the one ring is destroyed, all the rings of power lose their power because they're tied to that one ring. So they become just regular rings. So
no wonder they wanted to leave Greyhaven. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it was time, but especially for Galadriel, she was using Nenya to preserve Lothlorien and make it as beautiful as it was.
Right.
And so she could no longer do that with, eventually Lothlorien would fade. So those are the powers of the Elven Rings in general, is kind of preserving things, making things like that, looking magical and making these realms, and also hiding the wearer. Not like becoming invisible like the One Ring, but... and then the dwarf rings were used by the dwarves to amass these hoards of treasure. There were 7 dwarf rings, and then legendarily there were 7 great dwarf hoards, which were eventually all consumed by dragons. But it amplified the wearer's ability to amass treasure, but also their greed and their sort of propensity for exacting vengeance. So it kind of was a double-edged sword. But the dwarves, even though they used their rings while Sauron had the one, they were so hardy that they resisted his corruption. Because remember when we talked about Sauron's plan, his plan was to corrupt all the people wearing these rings and just get them under his will. The dwarves, they just totally resisted that because they're, hardy people. And then there were the 9 rings. Specifically, we know that 3 of the 9 were given to Númenorian lords. We know that 1 of the 9 was given to a king from the east that is probably Khamûl. Khamûl is the only name we have of any of the ring wraiths. He was supposedly this king from the east, and we don't really know much about him except for he was the second in command to the Witch King in terms of the Nazgul. And the Witch King probably was one of the Númenorians. Again, we don't know for sure, but I would bet, because it makes sense. The most powerful is probably a Númenorian who got it, not just a man. But the 4 others who got the rings, we don't know. We don't know who they were exactly. And for the men, this extended, the rings extended their lives. This did not do this with the dwarves. It did not extend the dwarves' lives, but it did for the men.
Probably because they gave into it as well.
I think, yeah, that would make sense. Like they resisted the corrupting influence, but then also they didn't get that benefit of living longer. And also the dwarves live a long time anyway, so maybe it just didn't have the same effect for them.
It probably also was something that attracted men, because it did make Bilbo live longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing about particularly the One Ring, but also I would imagine these rings of power. They appeal to the user, right? What do the elves want? Well, they want the glory and beauty of Aman, and they want to preserve this older way, this older world. What do the dwarves want? They want treasure. They want magnificent, wealth, and they want to smite their enemies, right? The dwarves are pretty. You don't cross a dwarf, right? They'll get revenge. So it amplifies these things. And what do men want? Well, they want to live forever, right? So I think it's interesting that all these rings play off of these kind of desires, the desires of what power looks like for these different races of Middle Earth.
Sure.
So it does extend their lives, but eventually they become wraiths. So they sort of start to fade and enter this other world, the Wraith world, or the world of the unseen, which elves can see into, or some elves can see into, and there's kind of an interesting relationship there. What we see when Frodo is stabbed on Weathertop, when he puts the ring on, he can see, and whenever he puts the ring on, he can see into the Wraith world. And when Glorfindel appears, and he's sort of part way in this like Wraith world, he can see Glorfindel has this like radiant white image in the Wraith world. He exists kind of in both. And so a lot of elves do. And there's other reasons for Glorfindel too, but that's a matter for another episode. So those are the people who have the rings. Specifically, after Sauron puts on the one and the elves all take their rings off, Celebrimbor goes to Galadriel in Lothlorien, this is according to Unfinished Tales, and seeks her counsel. And it's interesting, there's a line in Unfinished Tales where they consider destroying the rings. It's very similar to the moment with Isildur and Círdan and Elrond, right? Where they counsel him, right? Destroy this ring. And he goes, I don't know. It even says in Unfinished Tales, they should have done it, but they didn't. So at that moment, they could have just destroyed all the rings of power, but they don't. It says they could not find the strength to do so. And so what happens instead is Galadriel advises Celebrimbor that the ring should be split up, separated, hidden, and not used, right? As long as Sauron has this one ring, we're not going to use these rings because no good could come of that. So he gives Galadriel Nenya. He gives Vilya to gil-galad. And according to the account you want to believe, he also gives Narya to gil-galad, who then eventually gives it to Círdan, or he just then gives Narya to Círdan. So two different accounts, but eventually Narya ends up with Círdan. And then Círdan later, when Gandalf comes with all the wizards, would give it to Gandalf because he just liked the cut of his jib, I guess. He just saw something good in him. He's like, you know what? I think you could use this more than me.
This guy.
Yeah, this guy knows what's up. Then we get the war of the elves and Sauron. Sauron's like, give me that. Give me the rings. I want them. And they say no. They fight. And Sauron successfully takes Ost-in-Edhill, the capital of Eregion. And on the steps of the guild house, the House of the Myrdain, where all the rings of power were kept and created, he makes a last stand against Sauron, fights Sauron, and is not successful in defending. And he's captured. Celebrimbor is captured. Along with the 9 rings that were there. At this point, the rings have not been given out, with the exception of maybe the one to Durin the Third that we've talked about in the past. But the 9 are just sitting there, right? They haven't been distributed. So Sauron gets the 9. And he wants to know where the 7 and the 3 are. So he tortures Celebrimbor.
Baby.
Yeah. Celebrimbor, it's this tragic tale. Like it, and I think it's this connection with Fëanor, right? Fëanor also met a tragic end due to these great items of power he made. It's kind of the idea of this bright burning star, I guess fitting imagery for the House of Fëanor with the stars. It burns bright, but it also burns out pretty quick and pretty catastrophically, right? Maybe not quite as bad for Celebrimbor, but yeah, I mean, even though he denounced the oath, his fate was tied up with his family, and he kind of met a similar end to Fëanor.
I remember you saying that that's not going to end well.
No. It's tragic. The House of Fëanor is kind of a tragic house, and there's not much. There's not many happy endings that come from that. Sadly. But they did great things and they made great works. So that's why it's so tragic, is because they could have done great things if it were not for the influence of evil upon them. But so he's tortured by Sauron and does give up the location of the 7 rings. And Sauron eventually gets all those and then distributes them. But he does not tell him where the 3 rings are. And Sauron's pissed because those are the ones he wants the most, because he wants to get his dirty little hands on them and touch them so that he can corrupt them. And so Sauron kills Celebrimbor and puts his...
Logical.
It's about to get even more grim. He puts his body up on a pole, pierced with orc arrows, and hoists it as a war banner as they march upon Elrond and his forces. So that's cool. The final fate of Celebrimbor.
Oh,
is
cool.
as a war banner for Sauron.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Tragic ending.
Cool.
Tragic ending.
End of the podcast, folks.
But hey, his legacy lives on in, the Elven Rings did do some good, even though they were tied up with the evil. And look at where the Elisar ends up, right? He made that, and that's a happy ending with that, right? So it's not all bad. It's not all
good.
No. But he managed to at least shake off some of the Feanorian thing. Feanor was just ultimate tragedy. No, there was no good that came from the Silmarils, really.
Yes, because it's creepy.
Yeah.
Because it's creepy AF.
I guess the only good thing to come from the Silmarils is Beren and Luthien, but
it's a good story that came from them for sure.
So, that's really Celebrimbor, and I'm interested to see, because he's one of the characters we haven't really seen a lot in the promo stuff, in the trailers. So, I will say it makes sense they're focusing on Elrond because we know him, right, from Lord of the Rings.
Right. They definitely are giving us touchstones, is the way I like to look at it.
Yes. From, points of entry for people only familiar with maybe even just the films.
Right.
But it seems like they're giving Elrond that relationship with Khazad-dûm that Celebrimbor had in Eregion. So I'm interested to just see what exactly they do with Celebrimbor. How central is he? Obviously, he makes the ring, so he's very central. But we're not going to see that for a while.
Right.
Like, that's not going to be season 1 stuff. So he might be taking a back seat in season 1 and then become more important later on once we get Anatar revealed. And because that's kind of where his story kicks off, right?
Right.
Because, all the stuff we talked about before was like first age, right? With his father and uncle. And then all the second age stuff really kicks off with Anatar. So until we get him, Celebrimbor, at least from what we have in the text, is not super heavily involved. So I'm interested to see what they do with his character in this first season. And do they carry through that thread of him being in love with Galadriel? It's only an Unfinished Tales, so technically they don't have the rights to that, but they could still maybe do that. Who knows?
I wonder if because chemistry is chemistry, right? Like, if two people have chemistry, whether, I don't know if that's stealing the idea or not. I'm curious.
Well, I will say there is, obviously Galadriel is probably older than Celebrimbor. I don't know the exact dates, but the actor, I'm blanking on the name. I'm bad with the actor names. I have all these other Tolkien names floating around in my head, so I don't remember the actors' names.
Fair.
I think he's a pretty famous actor too, so I'm ashamed. But the actor playing Celebrimbor is much older than Morfydd Clark, who's playing Galadriel. Oh. So also that would be a little weird.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's not weird for Hollywood, let me just tell you.
Well, true.
It'd be weird if it was an older woman.
Fair.
That's when it would be weird.
Well, I think she technically is. She just looks younger,
That's exactly. Yeah, think about it. Galadriel is the actress is the same age as Liv Tyler. You know what I mean? Like, it's.
Yeah.
I know what the actress's name is. I'm just saying, in general, the grandmother is the same age as the granddaughter.
Right.
What do you think we're going to see in the first episode, Alex?
Well, I know we're going to see I'm pretty sure the whole first episode is just going to be devoted to setting up where we are in the Second Age. So It's going to be telling us all of these things that happen in the First Age that we need to know about in order for the Second Age stuff to make sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The stuff we've seen with Battle of Dagorlad and the Nerneath Arnoedad. So all these battles, setting up Galadriel's relationship with her brothers that die, Finrod. We need to know where Galadriel is at coming into this, particularly Galadriel, but also the other characters, and why why is the world like it is, right? So first episode is going to be all this first stage stuff. And they're releasing the first 2 episodes, I believe, at the same time. So then second episode, who I have no idea, which is exciting. I have no idea how they're going to start this off.
Do you think, even though we have no idea, we've done a good job in preparing our audience for the new show?
I hope so. I mean, look, there's plenty of other people out there, who, and we've done a little bit of speculating what we'll see, but I think we've done a good job of just laying out, here's what we know from the text. These are things they might pull from, they might not. But at the very least, it gives you a sense of what these characters have been through, who they are, so that going into the show, you're a little bit informed and you can maybe bring a little bit of that with you to start to understand these characters.
I'm excited.
I'm very excited too.
Alex, as always, thank you so much for all this amazing work and storytelling.
Well, thank you for being an interested party and a good listener.
In so many more ways than just one. Join us next week when Alex and I either talk about the first episode or the first 2 episodes
we'll see.
Of Rings of Power. It's kind of hard to just do one if both of them are being released. But we'll see.
Once you pop, the fun don't stop,
Okay, well, we're going to get dinged for that one. Some of the TM police.
If you want to sponsor us, Pringles.
Well, we're here.
Email us. Send in your letters.
Send a carry-on bird. Not a carry-on bird. Carrier pigeon. Carrier pigeon. There we go. The cousin to my favorite bird, the mourning dove. Alex, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. And until then,
may our roads meet again.
Blue